Hey, this is the host with the channel, and today, we're going to talk about the Ghost Riders of the West. Most legends have a point of origin, some event or incident that gave rise to the myth. Not this one. The Ghost Riders just sort of appeared in the late 1800s. They were first spotted by cattle drivers working on ranches across the Southwest, men who spent long periods alone on the range with only their thoughts and the endless sky for company. Then suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, they began to report seeing riders on skeletal horses that appeared at night during lightning storms. The earliest reports came from Texas, but soon sightings were reported all over the West. Men on horseback who seemed to be herding phantom cattle across the plains, up mountains, and through valleys, riding right up to the edge of campfires and then disappearing. Their horses were always white or palomino and looked like they hadn't drunk water in days, yet they never seemed thirsty and showed no signs of fatigue. The men themselves rode in silence and made no attempt to speak to anyone. They didn't try to communicate anything. They didn't want to be seen, and those who saw them knew it. In the stories, these riders would emerge during thunderstorms and shine bright lights directly in the eyes of those who camped out in the open range, causing them to stare directly into the flashes of lightning. When they turned their heads, they could see the ghostly riders on their equally ghostly horses vanish into thin air. But what they saw between those flashes was forever burned into their memory. They appeared to be men of the Old West, dressed in dusty clothes and Stetsons with faces illuminated by the eerie glow of their eyes. Tattered dusters billowed behind them as they rode past, momentarily revealing the lean, muscular horses beneath. A horse that seemed to be composed of pure white bone, so bleached by the sun that they appeared to glow. These ghostly apparitions would appear and disappear with the lightning, and when the campers tried to get closer, the riders would turn their heads slowly and stare directly at the intruders. When that happened, whatever storm they rode in on would suddenly shift directions. Winds would change, rain would pour from the sky, thunder would clap and lightning would flash until the storm passed and the riders disappeared. It was said that when the storm had passed and the riders were gone, if you looked in the direction they vanished, you could see a single hoof print in the ground where they stood. An imprint of a horse's shoe that was cold to the touch, impossibly cold, even though the riders themselves left behind no trace of ever having been there. So who were these strange beings? What did they want? No one knows for sure, but theories abound. Most agree they are spirits of some kind, bound to the earth, and destined to ride it eternally. In one version, they're the souls of outlaws who died violent deaths and were never buried, condemned to wander the earth and seek a final resting place. There is also a legend that they are Confederate deserters who fled to the desert to hide from Union soldiers, and that even in death, they continue to roam the land, seeking to escape detection. Some say they're even more malevolent than that, using their supernatural powers to cause storms, and occasionally snatching unwary travelers off their horses to drag down to some dark and mysterious fate. That may sound a bit far-fetched, but the fact that no one has ever managed to snap a picture of the Ghost Riders lends credence to the idea that they can somehow bend the laws of nature to their will. And even the most pragmatic among us might be hard-pressed to explain the strange tales that have been told around campfires by those who have seen them. One of the best-known stories involves two prospectors out in the barren hills of Nevada in 1893. These men were hardened by years on the frontier and were well acquainted with the dangers of the desert, including mirages. While crossing a dry wash, they were caught in a sandstorm. As visibility dropped to zero, the men struggled to stay upright on their horses. Then just as suddenly as it started, the storm stopped. One prospector later described it as the calm after the blast. As the wind died down and the dust began to settle, the men looked around and saw they were surrounded by hundreds of riders on white horses. The men stared back at them with eyes like burning coals. But then just as suddenly as they had appeared, the ghost riders vanished. According to the story, one of the prospectors broke down and ran after them, calling out as he went, "Hold, I want to go with you." But his companion grabbed him by the collar and dragged him back to his horse. He tried to dissuade his friend from chasing after the Ghost Riders, saying, "You don't know where you're going. You'll die of starvation before morning." but the man was adamant and rode off into the distance. He was never seen again. Given how many people claim to have seen the ghost riders, it's odd that no one has managed to capture even a fleeting glimpse of them on camera. Of course, given the time frame in which most of these sightings took place, that's not too surprising, but the legend does include one possible sighting in modern times. In June of 2012, Google Street View car was driving through the Nevada desert when its cameras picked up what appears to be a mounted rider wearing clothing similar to those seen by earlier witnesses. The photo immediately sparked debate and speculation online, but it's almost certainly just a person riding a horse. The images that follow show a person walking next to their horse, something that would make sense given that Street View cars are often driven slowly to get better images. So while it may be tempting to jump to the conclusion that the ghost riders have been spotted once again, it's probably just someone making their way along the highway. As with any good legend, there's a kernel of truth somewhere inside the fantastical tales of the ghost riders. It's entirely possible that some of the sightings were actually people who survived lightning strikes, suffering temporary amnesia that rendered them incapable of remembering their own names, let alone explaining what they had seen. After all, the brain's response to severe trauma can be unpredictable. Survivors of lightning strikes often suffer permanent physical and psychological damage, so it is not unreasonable to assume that some may have suffered only temporary damage that manifested itself as a complete loss of identity. The rest of the Ghost Rider lore probably grew from that initial spark. People explaining what they saw in the light of a thunderstorm and trying to make sense of it in a world that already teemed with lawlessness and danger. It's not hard to imagine how the story could have morphed and evolved over time, growing more lurid as each new teller added their own embellishments. But there's another possibility, one that brings the Ghost Riders into the realm of cryptozoology. The desert is an unforgiving place. Storms come out of nowhere, turning normally dry washes into raging rivers in a matter of minutes. Lightning strikes are common, and there are few places to take cover. Travelers often have no choice but to endure, and the isolation can play tricks on the mind. There are even documented cases of people mistaking mirages for bodies of water, leading them to trudge warily toward a shimmering lake only to collapse in the middle of a dry wash when they find nothing but sand. In extreme cases, this can lead to dehydration and death. It seems reasonable to assume that the Ghost Riders were part of the same kind of delusion, a figment of the imagination conjured by the harsh environment as a last-ditch effort to prevent those isolated on the range from wandering aimlessly until they drop dead. If this is the case, it makes perfect sense that they appear only during thunderstorms, as electricity is known to affect the human psyche in unpredictable ways. Of course, that doesn't explain why the Ghost Riders appear to be herding cattle or why they seem to communicate with each other telepathically. But it's possible that these details are simply the result of pareidolia, the tendency of the human brain to perceive meaningful images within random data. It is the same phenomenon that causes us to see faces in clouds or hear voices in running water. So when cattle hands out on the range see a herd of phantom cattle being driven by specters from beyond the grave, it's entirely possible they're just seeing what they want to see. But there is one thing that really doesn't lend itself to a simple explanation: the single cold hoof print that appears wherever the Ghost Riders stand. It is unlikely that anyone will ever figure out exactly what the Ghost Riders are or where they came from. But the fact that these strange apparitions continue to appear to this day suggests they are here to stay. And it seems as though the best advice anyone can offer is a warning passed down from generation to generation of cattle hands, a cautionary tale that serves as a reminder of the dangers of the desert and the need to respect its unforgiving terrain. If you see the riders, ride the other way. Thanks for watching. This is your host. And if you liked this video, check out our other content. We have a channel where we talk about all kinds of mysterious beasts and a channel where we look into cryptozoology news. Also, don't forget to subscribe.